Good Friday evening, everyone, and welcome to the Earth's Final Warning radio podcast. I am your host, Brian DeLory, and I thank you all for tuning into the program tonight, whether live or by way of download. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for your listenership. Tonight, I'm going to be speaking about what is, for me, a very difficult subject to talk about, and that is my testimony of being personally attacked by demons. And I would advise anyone listening live or by way of download, if they have children present, to remove them from the room, simply because the subject matter is of such a nature that it may frighten them. What I am about to share with you are personal anecdotes about situations I've experienced over approximately a 10-year period, the last 10 years, beginning May 3rd of 2005, and before, prior to that, all the way to the present day. I know many people are skeptical when they hear stories such as mine, but whether you're skeptical or not, I know that it happened, and I stand before God, and I lie not. What I'm about to share with you was all too real, and it was very frightening, and just knowing that you have a creature such as a demon spirit in your residence is frightening. And I'm not going to go through all the minutia of the situation. I can just tell you this. I'm going to start with my childhood very quickly. I was raised as basically a Catholic, if you want to say that. My mother was a devout Catholic. Let me rephrase that. She subscribed to the views of Catholicism. My father subscribed to the views of Jehovah's Witnesses, but neither one of them were practicing their religion. So basically, you could say I was raised in a godless home. Every once in a while, either one of them would, quote a scripture or whatever, but they were not practicing their religions in any way, shape, or form, other than the fact that we oftentimes went to Catholic church on Sundays. Beyond that, I never saw my parents praying, never saw my parents reading the Bible, or I never saw my parents participate in any other religious activities. It was strictly a once-a-week thing only, and that wasn't every week either. We weren't faithful attendees of church, let's put it that way. And of course, I went to the same Catholic school where the church was located, which was Holy Name of Jesus Catholic Church here in West Palm Beach, Florida. Anyhow, so that's how I was raised. That was my religious upbringing, and by the time I was 6 or 7 years old, my parents had split up, and then my mother was so upset by what had happened, she just started moving from place to place because she was just so adversely affected by the divorce. So I think it's something that caught her by surprise, even though she was basically the one who initiated it. It really had a bad effect on her, and I really felt sorry for my mother. And so we moved up to Virginia Beach at one point. This is where my sister was living. First we visited there, then the following year we went up there, and we were there for a couple of months, and then my mother moved back down here to Florida after Christmas of 1970. And so I began living with my sister in 71, and my sister and her husband at that time were using drugs. They had a friend who was a witch. and they had a Ouija board in their house, and they engaged in these types of activities. And so you can certainly see where the beginnings of all this started. False religion, then moving with my sister, and who was had a witch as a friend, and playing with Ouija boards and tarot cards. I remember my sister telling me one time that they had played with the tarot cards, and my brother-in-law claimed that when they were playing with the tarot cards, he reached out to grab a card and he felt something bite him. Now, this is a true story, and I'm not going to go into any more than that. There's a lot of details that I could go into, but I'll spare you that, and I don't want to divulge all my sister's secrets. So it was a bad situation, to say the least. And I guess this would be where my first demonic experience took place, although at the time I didn't realize it. I didn't realize it as that. Or I should say I didn't recognize it as that. One night I went to bed. I was still awake probably 10 minutes later, and suddenly I felt a big someone hit around the foot of my bed. My first thought is that it was the cat. We had a cat, and I thought the cat had jumped on the bed. So I went out of the room and went downstairs, and I looked across, and I could see that the cat was sitting in my sister's lap, and she was watching TV. And so I asked her, did the cat come upstairs? And she said, no, the cat hasn't left. She's been with me ever since she went to bed. So I didn't know anything about demons at the time. I didn't know what to think, and I forgot about it, and that was the end of that. But it was in this house where I began to experience psychic experiences. Okay, we moved. Later that year, I moved back down here to Florida. Was heavily involved in rock music, although at that time, that was about the extent of it. And I was involved in demonic rock music. My father had all kinds of demonic people who had moved into our home. It's a long story, and I'm not going to go into any details about it, other than to say, again, it was a bad living situation. So for the second time, in August of 1974, I moved back to Virginia Beach. By this time, my brother-in-law and my sister were living in a different place. And by the way, it's strange for me because I can pull up the street view of both of these homes on Google, and they almost look the same as they did, almost 50 years ago. It's really strange. Anyhow, and again, I know that they had a Ouija board, and now they were smoking marijuana in front of me. So you can certainly see what was going on in the home. There was no God in the home. And here is where the psychic experiences really intensified, and most of them were related to my mother. And I'll only share one with you very quickly. My mother was living here in Florida. She had come to visit me for my birthday. She had dropped me off previously at some point there in 1974. And then come back to Florida, and I was upset because she wasn't supposed to be there for my birthday, and I just had this really bad feeling or strange feeling. I think it would be better to call it a strange feeling all day, and I was crying, and my sister took notice of it, and I told her, I said, I miss my mom, want my mom here for my birthday, and I really kind of feel like she's going to be here, and my sister was telling me she's not coming. She would have told me, and she never said anything. And my sister was concerned for me because I was so upset. So we went down into the living room, which faced the street. We were sitting there for about 5 minutes when suddenly I saw my mother's car pull up in front of the building we were living in. And I told my sister, and my sister thought I was just either nuts or joking around. I said, "No, look." And there she was, and then she came up and knocked on the door. So these psychic experiences began in earnest, I believe, in 1974. Okay, I moved back down to Florida in November of 1974, and I've been here ever since. But I moved back in with my father, and it was about I don't know, 6 months later, maybe, I did start getting involved with drugs. And the following year, and that would have been 75. So the following year, in 76, my friend and I decided to play with a Ouija board. And when we did, nothing happened. And about a week or two later, I rode my bike past a guy's house, a guy who I never laid eyes on. I knew his brothers, but I never saw him physically. Never spoke to him, nothing. But he used to play the guitar, and I was a guitar player too. And I heard him playing, and as I passed by his house riding my bike, I just felt this impression that something bad was going to happen to him. And, I didn't know him. I didn't know anything about him. But I know what I felt. So that happened a couple times more. Every time I passed by his house, I would remember that. And so, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks later, maybe a month later, I was in bed one night, and if I didn't know better, I would have said that a cannon exploded next to my bed. It was that loud. And I sat straight up in bed, and I said to myself, somebody just murdered Sammy. Now, the guy's name was Sammy. I'm not going to divulge his last name, but that was his first name. And, of course, how could I know? When I had this feeling that something was going to happen to him, I never considered what it was going to be. I never considered murder or, drowning, whatever. It wasn't something that I gave a lot of thought to. And, but when it happened that night, I heard that loud cannon sound, and I sat up. I knew instantly that he had been murdered. But I was so tired. It was like 4 o'clock in the morning. I still had another 3 hours before I had to get up. So I went back to sleep, but I purposed to go take another bus route. There was one north of my home and one south of my home, basically equally distanced from each other. But I knew if I went to the one south of my home, I could pass by his street, and I figure if he had been murdered, I would see some type of police activity there, police cars or something. Well, when I did that, I passed by his house, and all I saw was a couple of kids walking down the road. I didn't see anything, so I thought to myself, just a nightmare. By the time I got to the bus stop, everyone was talking about it. Sammy had been murdered. And so I was really kind of shocked. The strange part of all this is that I never told anyone. I never told anybody that I was having these experiences. And I think part of that is because of God's intervention. Suppose I had told somebody that I felt something was going to happen to Sammy. Then when it did, they would say, hey, guess what? You're psychic. And then perhaps I would have attempted to cultivate that gift, if you will, and maybe I would have gotten in very deep, and perhaps I would have lost my soul. I just don't know. But nevertheless, it happened this way, and I never told anybody. And then I had a similar experience with my father's girlfriend's son. This would have been like 3 months later. He'd come down to visit, and by the way, she had become a Christian during this time. She was actually healed of paralysis and hypoglycemia. And so she was now a Christian. She was singing gospel music, but she was still good friends with my father. So she brought her son and her youngest son and her youngest daughter down, whom I was close to. And the son, Roy, spent the New Year's weekend with me. And of course, on Sunday, if I'm not mistaken, I don't know.